over your personal funds to banks and government bodies. Yet the real sting in the tail lies in the unprecedented level of control CBDC implementation offers to the establishment. An intricate web of social engineering can be woven as the flow of money in society becomes tailored to specific interests. Consider a scenario where CBDCs have an expiration date, coercing consumers to accelerate their spending. Factor in the imposition of Chinese-style social credit scores creeping into the West, where unfavourable speech or belief systems incur financial penalties or account limitations. Australia's choice to pioneer the first wave of this cashless future is a clever strategic move from the establishment. Capitalising on the efficient enforcement of severe lockdown measures, the government seems ready to leverage the compliant temperament of Australians to pilot this currency overhaul. During the pandemic, when people said this will be used as a kind of piloting to introduce new social models and unprecedented levels of control, people said that was a conspiracy theory, that it was ridiculous. But haven't you noticed how frequently since then you've seen measures introduced that would have been unthinkable in the pre-pandemic era? The idea that banks could control your finance to that degree would have been ridiculous in 2018. Now it's being piloted in Australia, probably because, as it says here, Australia was compliant, tolerating those internment camps, people being arrested because they weren't wearing masks, people being arrested because they were saying the wrong thing. It seems that Australia and Canada, countries that were previously regarded as bastions of liberal democracy, are introducing authoritarian measures that would have been unthinkable just 5 years ago. Is it possible that these ideas will spread beyond Australia and that Australia is being used essentially to pilot financial schemes that we'll all be subject to in the next few years? A total of 130 countries, representing 98% of the global economy, are now exploring digital versions of their currencies, with almost half in advanced development, pilot or launch stages, a closely followed study shows. The global push for CBDCs comes as physical cash use falls and authorities look to fend off the threat to their money printing powers from Bitcoin and big tech firms. Every time there's been a change from gold to paper money, people are cynical about it, skeptical about it, and concerned about it. But generally, these evolutionary trends do place more power in the hands of centralized authoritative systems that are difficult to access and are not democratic. Do you remember that when cryptocurrencies were first mooted, they were largely reported on in pejorative terms, condemned because of the damage they caused to the environment, because they're unstable or dangerous? Then it became clear that they were effective and that they were here to stay. So the next phase is to control them, to prevent you accessing, as in the case of Australia, prevent you spending your money on cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin, till eventually the only digital currency you're allowed to use is one that they can tightly control and at will presumably switch off. In 2021, the Bank of England called on ministers to decide whether a central bank digital currency should be programmable, ultimately giving the issuer control over how it is spent by the recipient. That will be sold to us, of course, as, what's great about this currency is you can stop your children spending money on cigarettes and alcohol. But of course, we're familiar with that playbook now. This will be for your convenience. This is going to be fantastic. Once you grant them that authority, once you grant them that ability, even if optimistically we say, oh, the current government would never do that, you can conceive of a world where a more draconian government might come in and deploy these measures a little less humanely. But personally, I think we already have the institutions and elites in place that would deploy these measures in a draconian way. Tom Mutton, a director at the Bank of England, said there could be some socially beneficial outcomes from that, preventing activity which is seen to be socially harmful in some way. It's a very vague sentence and affords numerous interpretations, and that's very dangerous because ultimately I think what we want is the maximum amount of freedom, the maximum amount of ability to trade freely, the maximum amount of ability to speak freely, the maximum amount of control over our institutions, whether they're private or democratic. What the evident drift is towards the invisible creation of institutions that will be able to impose absolute control, even if that's not what they do in the first instance. Even if the first instance is just, oh, there was a glitch, it was shut for 24 hours. Down the line, it's like, we're shutting this down until this riot stops. We're shutting this down until these protests are quietened. We're having to do this because of climate change or because of this pandemic. They'll always find a reason to deploy authority once they have it. I think the only chance we have is to prevent the authority being realised in the first place. You could think of giving your children pocket money, but programming the money so that it couldn't be used for sweets. There's a whole range of things that money could do. Pro programmable money, which we cannot do with current technology. It's quite telling that the analogy that's used is a parent allowing their children to spend money, but only in the way that they want it to be chosen. I don't want a parental relationship with the state. I want the state to be there simply for service, a bureaucratic entity that has no opinion or view on my personal or moral conduct. If we increase centralized authority for already corrupt institutions, we will obviously increase the corruption. Because of the nature of cryptocurrencies that are based on blockchain as a ledger that records every transaction, governments would have unrestricted and easy access and command and control over when and how and what people do with their money. Beyond simply keeping an ever watchful eye over what citizens are up to, governments would also be able to decide on more radical and, in immediate terms, much more damaging moves, such as cutting people off from their money. So under certain circumstances, the government would have the ability to prevent you accessing your money. In a sense, it's not your money anymore. Remember the famous quote, some people don't notice their change because they never move. Well, look at the potential to restrict your movement that's being imposed now. As soon as you become an undesirable, the minute your own interests are opposed to the interests of the state, you can be switched off, faded out, shut down in an instant. Just because at this moment you're not an enemy of authority, it doesn't mean it can't happen at some point in the future, either because you change or authority changes. The world has recently learned through Canadian authorities' actions when bank accounts of participants in a civil protest were frozen that this is perfectly doable, even without centralized government-issued digital money. So it's already possible. They're already doing it. There have been recent political scandals in our country where a bank no longer wanted to serve an unfavorable customer. These, I believe, are outliers where institutions that we didn't previously see as authoritative are granted new authority. The media seems to have authority that I didn't grant it. Social media sites have an authority that we didn't collectively grant them. And now banking systems are being used as agents of control. Fascism is when financial and private interests and state interests align to the degree where ordinary people are pincered into narrow pathways of barely perceivable freedom. The only freedom you'll have is the quiet privacy of your own mind. No freedom of movement, no freedom of trade, no freedom of speech. What we are seeing now are the emergent shoots of the dystopia that we are all being invited to inhabit. But imagine if that form of currency were the only one available. There can be no outsiders now. Where once the outgroups were travellers, people that were presumed not to pay taxes or operate within our systems. What's being engineered now are systems that are so powerful that you could be regarded as an outsider just because of your political beliefs, just because